And it's interesting because, it's kind of like, you can think of yourself as just like a being who just like spits out frogs, right? You just like have them all in pots, and then you just decide to warm them up based on how you want to cook them and how to process and digest the nutrients of the frogs. And oftentimes, sometimes you have to let it burn completely in order for a new frog to be developed.
Hey everyone, welcome to Theta Wave. My name is Ryan Reed. I'm an AI engineer, musician, and songwriter. And I'm here with my co-host, Jacob Holland. Hey guys. Jacob, do we have any updates or anything like that today?
Wow. So last week we did our first research paper episode, which I think went really well. I think it was awesome. We talked about, J147, which is an amazing new compound that they're seeing if it has any pretty good effects or anything. Today,
being used to treat Alzheimer's. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And we are also looking at something similar, though this one has a lot more to do with, while it does have stuff to do with Alzheimer's, it also has to do with a lot with depression, and, stimulating neurogenesis and the growth of neurons in the hippocampus. So that is something that we are going to be talking about, but it's going to be a little different in the second hour. So the first hour is going to be a little bit more of a free flow. We might discuss a little bit of EEGs, or electroencephalograms. What are they called? Electroencephalograms. Yes, there we go. It's a really long word, but I find them quite fascinating. I've done some pretty extensive research in them for the past couple of days because, we've had some reason to now. So, you might find some pretty interesting videos coming up in the future. So what we're going to be researching is NSI-189, which is really cool because it rhymes. So it's really easy to remember.
I didn't actually realize that it rhymed. Like whenever I said it in my
189
head, it never rhymed, but I guess it does.
So that's how it's pretty easy for me to
NSI-189.
Yeah. But also what's really interesting is that I think in 2021, they changed it from NSI-189 to Alto 100, which doesn't rhyme, which I think is kind of stupid in my opinion.
Yeah.
I like NSI-189 more, so I think we can call it whatever we want. Yes. If we ever try this stuff in one of our videos, we're going to call it NSI-189 because
100%.
It's a little catchier in my opinion. So anyways.
Wait, what did they call it? Alto Grant?
Alto 100.
Alto 100.
Mm-hmm. I don't even know what it stands for.
It's like, what do we call this drug that treats ADD? I know. Tenor, 250.
It's like, what? It seems so arbitrary at that point. But maybe it's just because I don't understand it. And so maybe there was some changes over time that led it to have the need to have that name.
Yeah.
I just don't know what that would be, personally.
I don't either. Like, what is it? Seems very ambiguous for what it is.
I'll have to ask somebody.
Ask them.
Yeah, ask the guys who changed it.
You're like, I just have one question to you.
Why did you do this?
One question to you about your new drug. What's up with the name?
It rhymed. It was awesome, easy for people to remember, and we could have sold it a lot better. Sold it. Sold.
We could have sold it. We could have sold it. We could have sold it.
It's more funner to sell it.
Yes. It's way more funner.
Well,
it's actually the funnest. Funnerist.
Hey, funner is a word, so that's all I'm saying. We've known this for a while now. Come on. It's been added to the dictionary, so I have a right to say funner. And sell it. But
so how's your week been going?
Oh man, my week's been going pretty well. I've tried to figure out what classes I'm going to be taking next semester. So I've changed my associates. So a year ago, when I first started, I was going to be a marshal, U.S. Marshal. That's what I wanted to do. Yeah. Well, it was more like a year and a half ago, I would say. And so that's kind of where I was going. And so my parents were like, oh, we'll put you in the, criminal justice,
Why
system.
did you want to be a U.S. Marshal?
I don't know. Well, actually, it was because I wanted to stop human traffickers, and I knew that was something that could have been done, and that was like kind of the easiest way to do it. And so I was like, sure, I'm gonna try this out and like cultivate my like stopping human trafficker pathway there. And then I kind of realized how many already like sturdy, already well-founded corporations there are that are already doing that. And so I've kind of changed it a little bit to be able to, instead of, actually going in and stopping the guys, but acting as an intelligence agency in the heart of Houston, which is what it's going to like double as a ministry, helping people, but also gathering information. And I mean, this is going to be a while in the future, right? Because look at what we're doing. This isn't something that I'm working towards now. It's just I'm making plans, and I can't really talk about it too much because it's like, oh, what if my ops hear this? What if all the pimps are listening to our podcast?
Dude, this is a very pimpy podcast. I could see pimps liking this podcast.
That's what I'm thinking. I mean, come on, neuroscience, AI, machine.
I mean, every pimp I talk to is all about the neuroscience.
Yeah, all my
psychology, philosophy.
They can't shut up about neurogenesis.
I know. So it was actually my pimp that got me into it.
You're the one who pimped you.
Yeah.
Come over here. I'll give you a break today. You go research this. It was gonna go on.
Yeah.
That's actually fair. Sadly, my pimp kicked me out, so so he left me on the streets for nothing. And so I was gonna go get some revenge, but now I'm like, wait, I actually this, in neuroscience. So I'm going to change my associates. So we'll see what I do. I might do one in biomedical engineering because that's an option.
That's fun.
I know. I saw that and I was like, ooh, it's going to be hard, but it looks so amazing.
Man, that would be toughy for me trying to decide between neuroscience and bioengineering.
Well, I can get an associate's in biomedical engineering and then transfer over to like finishing my bachelor's in neuroscience and then do a master's program.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's like, I'll have like biomedical engineering and neuroscience in one. So it's,
it kind of sucks that you have to, it sucks that you have to use the college degree system, for something like neuroscience. Because like for me as a machine learning engineer, like machine learning engineers don't need degrees necessarily to work in the field. That does sometimes they can help, but like the big thing is you have to know what you're doing. Like as long as you know what you're doing,
they'll be like, sure,
nobody cares. Like it's and so one could argue there are more efficient ways of learning in depth something like machine learning. They don't involve going to college and wasting a lot of unnecessary time on stuff that you're not going to utilize. And it sucks that you have to go through the college system for something like neuroscience, because in order to gain like any sort of like real kind of credibility.
Yeah, because, personally, it's like, oh, well, even if I was somebody who knew everything about neuroscience, it doesn't necessarily matter if I don't have a degree. And even if, let's say I find a magical book that tells me everything there is in neuroscience, and all of a sudden now I fully understand all the concepts and everything 100% about the brain. If I don't have a degree, it's not going to matter.
Nobody's going to listen to you.
Nobody's going to listen to me, especially because probably it would be so incredibly complex. They're like, this guy's just making it up.
Yeah. You probably could eventually get people to listen to you by showcasing what it is you're talking about and working on making it understandable for them. And but you're right. Like initially, if you were to just go up to them and tell them what you found, they'd be like, who are you? Like,
so, just some guy, without any degree, and like, oh, get this dude out of here. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And I mean, to be fair, I have actually seen some of the uh, emails that some professors get from people who don't have degrees.
They're friends. Yeah.
There's some pretty pseudoscientific theories out there. That's all I'm saying, that people
You
are
don't wanna
trying
tell
to
me.
tell people, and they're like, listen, I figured out the secrets of the universe. And it's like,
No,
you don't even know what
No,
an
you haven't.
electron is, my friend. It's like, huh? This is quite terrible. But so it's like, I understand like why you need credibility, but like you said, for what's nice about machine learning is that they'll just like you can see the
They'll
results
test you
immediately.
on your knowledge
Yeah.
of it, and they'll ask you, make sure that you do know what you're talking about.
Mhm.
And if you're not, it's usually pretty self-evident, because there just is no way you can really easily fudge in a conversation knowledge about that kind of
Oh
stuff.
yeah, that'd be impossible.
I mean, you could fudge it to people that didn't know machine learning, but not to
Mhm.
people that do.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And it's kind of like trying to pretend you're a physicist to a physicist,
It's not gonna work.
No,
It's not gonna work, dude.
no.
I could pretend that I was studying physics,
Yes.
but I would just do my best to turn the conversations to
You just
get
be like
them
really
to
humble about it. Like, be like,
yes, and get them to just explain things. Then I can take what they're saying and just get more
remodel
questions.
it.
Yeah, remodel it. You get more questions out of them. Be like, oh well, they're totally understanding what I'm saying. And so I'm sure they're totally studying it. It's like, well, on my free time, I do. I actually love to fall asleep to like physics theories and like different things like that.
That's fine.
Like the
Yeah.
holographic
I used
principle.
to
Listen to that last night as I drifted.
I used to fall asleep to uh mathematic principles. Like,
That's
not because I found mathematics super interesting,
quite the opposite.
but because I really wanted to be able to absorb more mathematics and to be able for my brain to be processing like the information that I was learning during the day and better utilize it and have better recall with it and that kind of stuff. And so I was like, well, the more my brain is hearing the information, the more likely it is that it's going to be stored and that there's going to be relevant, spots in the hippocampus for it. And so it was actually because it was something that was like, so far outside of my kind of comfort zone. Because believe it or not, I'm not actually a naturally, I'm not naturally a mathematical, I don't have a naturally mathematical mind. That was something that I built later on as an adult. And for several reasons. One, for just logical processing and emotional processing. But two, because it was necessary for what it was that I was wanting to do.
Could you expand upon how it helped with your emotional reasoning?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's interesting. Usually we think of mathematics and when we think of logic. And it's like, well, if you think about the brain, logic and emotions are so infused and interconnected with each other. So that's why you have some people who often have very big imbalances when they have too much emotional apathy or they have too much logical reasoning. It can get them in trouble, and it's actually a balance and interplay between those two. And it's interesting how mathematics help with that.
And what I found, like being on both sides of that fence, too much emotions, too much logical processing, is that for me, when I had too little logical processing and too much just raw emotion dictating things, I not only was not choice about my actions and made a lot more mistakes, but also wasted a lot more time with the chaos that the emotions caused, and indecisions that the emotions caused. However, on the flip side of that, the too much logical processing, there was one element of similarity as in the problems that it caused. And that was that it also caused a difficulty in making, sometimes a difficulty in making choices in things, because I would want to process too much, and so it would delay delay me making a choice on something because I didn't feel like it was fully processed yet. And so there was that element. And then one of the other downsides to having, kind of being too focused on a logical processing element is that I find that it often makes you really abrasive to people and very direct, and which I enjoy being. Like, I don't not like being direct, but it almost gives you an air of superiority that people really don't like.
Yeah.
And makes you more willing to tell them exactly what you think of them, which is not always a good thing.
No, always, right.
And so there is some sort of a healthy balance between them. I think the key for me was being able to allow myself empathy, but like a limited amount of empathy, but not lose my logical emotional processing abilities. And so it allows me to be more warm to people, and kind of gives me a little more sociability, being able to sit there, understand when there's a reason to sit there and listen to somebody's frustrations without commenting and giving my thoughts on it, or critiquing things, and when it's appropriate or not appropriate to tear down somebody's beliefs, because that's something that I really love doing, and do it too much probably.
Nah,
but
it's the right amount.
It's
all about balance, right?
There are times that it's healthy to tear down somebody's beliefs, and times when it's can do more harm than it would good, because they are finding some sort of emotional comfort that's necessary to them right now in that belief. And attacking it is only going to aggravate them. So
what I've noticed is that it actually makes them go deeper into their beliefs in a way sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
And maybe that also induces a deeper level of, it's kind of like, how far can you bend it? The more you bend it, the more pressure, and then eventually it'll snap. But, if you're going to, if you're talking about the sociability aspect of this, it's that snap is going to come a lot later. It's only going to ruin whatever altruistic relationship y'all could have had, and so it's like, well, I've noticed you just let people believe in what they believe in, and, you work with it.
There's also an element of, and this is kind of why the empathetic element is helpful to have, even from a logical perspective. There, as a more logical being dealing with emotional beings, there is in an ideal world, people would be able to hear the things that you say, evaluate them, and with what the information that they have and the things that they know, and then determine if what you were saying was valid or had merit. That's not really the world that we live in. There's, when you're dealing with primarily emotional beings, they,
and not just emotional beings, but emotional beings who want to make sure that you view them through a certain persona. Otherwise, they will feel attacked. which is why they hate that evaluation aspect, because what if there's an error in their representation of themselves that they want to portray? And that's something that is going to absolutely just make their brain go haywire all over the place. It's like sirens going off at that point. It's like what I wanted to represent isn't being represented. So what I want to express isn't. So therefore, I'm going to, the representation of myself will die, which translates as I'm going to die in this weird kind of like feedback loop type of way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's scary. What people.
It's that weird, it's that weird kind of relationship with people's values, because with our emotional processing is there in part to give us a instant kind of gut reaction to something interacting with our values, our primary values, so like, obviously we have our survival instinct, which is our base value that we all have. And we evaluate a lot of other things against that. Yeah. You have your secondary values, that are the things that are kind of core to your being. And this kind of branch of values that, and the closer that gets, kind of to your core, the harder it is for you to let that go or question it. And so there's some things that people believe that you could probably show them, is wrong, and that they would listen to. But there's other things that are kind of somehow integrated with, something deeper, one of their, deeper values. And that becomes much harder, because when they feel like they're being attacked, it immediately is going to add to that emotional defense mechanisms. It's like, okay, this is value I need to protect. So, keep that thing away, rather than feeling like they're being helped, and it's because of that gut kind of emotional reaction, you're aggravating that emotional reaction there. And so if we were to instead, if we were to see that was something that was kind of core to them, it was something that was a deeper held value, and go about it instead in a way of developing the relationship and the trust there, to the point that the relationship and their understanding of you outweighs, and their knowledge that you are trying to help outweighs the initial emotional response to that value being questioned. They would be far more likely to hear, evaluate, process what you say. So what your information you're giving them would be far more likely to reach their processing centers
that are correlated with their values. Yeah, it's kind of, I really like this analogy. It's kind of like the frog in the pot of water, right? If you put a frog in a pot of boiling water, you gotta jump out, right? But if you put a frog in just like a normal lukewarm water, you turn it slowly but surely, it heats up. That frog doesn't know what's going on until all of a sudden it's completely cooked.
You're making it sound a whole lot less helpful.
That's pretty much how it is. But the frog is.
You make the frog think you're its friend by giving it lukewarm water, and then before you know it, it's boiled to death.
The frog isn't you; it's your ideas. It's what.
No, you're saying it's their ideas.
Their ideas, yes, and yours. Oftentimes, like I've noticed, this has happened in my life with many of the things that I've believed in. And it's interesting because, it's kind of like, you can think of yourself as just like a being who just like spits out frogs, right? You just like have them all in pots. And then you just decide to warm them up based on how you want to cook them and how to process and digest the nutrients of the frogs. And oftentimes, sometimes you have to let it burn completely in order for a new frog to be developed. You got to let those frogs die. That's all I'm saying. It's not a bad analogy. You know what I mean? I'm just going with what we already got, but it's kind of like that, you have to die to be reborn in a way. And that's often what we do with our thoughts always. And sometimes those thoughts are a lot more primary than we realize, or oftentimes some of the thoughts that we hold on, we grip for dear life are actually not even close to what we fundamental value. And and that is an interesting relationship as well.
Well, it's almost more like the there are times that we hold something in high value that really has no integration with the rest of our being, and really holds very little value to us. And it's that moment when you realize how, to your well-being, like for instance, as an example, the first example that pops into my head is a lot of the political views that people get up in arms over.
Does it matter?
They hold those so close to their, their being and like their core values, and will get inflamed, because, and part of it is I feel like is the social implication and repercussion that they feel they will receive if they don't hold those values as part of their core being. And so because of that ramification, their brain learns to integrate that value into their kind of core sets of ideals. And even though it really, in practicality, doesn't hold any real sort of, resonance or and doesn't even really integrate with the rest of their values,
Yeah. And that's definitely something very tricky to navigate, right? Because, a lot of philosophers went absolutely bonkers because they did something similar where they kind of tore apart everything at the essence of their being to try to figure themselves out in the world around them. And they ended up just kind of going insane, which, I think they kind of got stuck in their own head. I think if they got stuck in their external environments and the world around them and inferences and curiosity, I think it would change. I think that wouldn't have been the case. But I think, they attacked too much of their core values to really get to the bottom of it all. And they ended up kind of just going insane. And so, I think that also speaks to, why even, maybe a little less sophisticated people kind of feel like they're going insane when they have to go through this whole transformation as well. Even when it comes to something as arbitrary as political ideologies, because they're doing that.
Here's a really good example of something that I felt that I kind of tore apart to the point that it started making me feel like almost like I was on the verge of a crossroads where I could like take one approach towards viewing this information and drive myself nuts with it. Or another approach that would be a completely healthy approach, towards it. And it was when I realized the likely futility of any decision that we make in our life, and the fact that everything that we do was something that was predetermined, was going to happen because of the fact that we are a product of our circumstances and our experiences. Our brains are a product of our experiences and our genetics, and develop as a result of that. And so because we grow up, in the place that we do, or surrounded by the people that we do, and we have we're surrounded by the other brains, that we are, and we have the experiences that we have, they all form the next decisions that we make. And so in that regard, from the very first instant of anything happening in the universe, everything that happened then on out was a product of the previous events, meaning that when we decide something, we don't actually really have any control over that. We were always going to decide what we decided. And that level of futility an inability to control was something that I was like having difficulty coming to grips with, because it almost takes away, it feels almost like it takes away your purpose. And it is something that I emotionally rejected, kind of not mentally. I didn't mentally reject it. I knew it was, true, but emotionally I was rejecting it as something that was taking away my ability to live life and or I guess live life the way that I wanted. And so I was kind of at the crossroads of I either completely reject this and choose to live in ignorance, which is not who I am, so I'm not going to do that. I look at this as as meaning life is ultimately futile and without purpose, in which case that drives me insane. Or I simply view this as a interesting supplementary information to give context to the realm that kind of exists beneath the life I live.
Mm-hmm.
And don't let that dissuade me from the curiosity and interest of life, but simply kind of view it more like I am riding a rapid down a river. I'm riding like this river, and it's taking me with it. And I don't really have any choice where it goes, but it doesn't mean it's any less interesting.
Mm-hmm. Can swim better. You can become a little more one with the water, if you will. From a, I know that's a very Eastern way of looking at it, but I think it's a very good one. And what's so fascinating, the reason why we have such a reason to believe that we have free will is because the patterns innate to our experience and the potential harmonizing with the external world is so large. There's such a large amount of potential ways for us to live. And so we think fundamentally that same potential is what characterizes the essence of who I am. And I, as an independent agent, have the ability to navigate it. And to some degree, that is true. But from what you're saying is still fundamentally true as well. So how do we understand this? How do we come to grips with both of these different conflicting aspects of what we know to be true?
Well, it ultimately kind of delves back, I think, to our inability to fully comprehend time, because in our sequential kind of existence, to us, and this is just, I'm kind of theorizing that there's more to time than what we perceive, because it seems like there is on a lot of different regards. But but when we make choices in life, there are outcomes. And so we want to feel like our choices are our own and that we can control what happens next. But in reality, because of the sequential nature of our existence, and that we are a product of our sequential experiences in this one-dimensional timeline, we don't really have any real choice there. We are making choices, but we don't have any options, so to speak. And so I think it's our kind of inability to fully understand that kind of nature and concept. Like, I think if we were, say there was 2 or 3 dimensions of time and we were able to perceive all of them, that would be a lot more comfortable for us, because we'd be making all choices at all times, and would be able to experience all outcomes, so to speak, and
maybe even experience a moment for eternity.
Yeah, I mean, like
which is such a
and you could go to the moments. You could go, you go to the whatever moments you wanted to go to, and exist in all of them or none of them. And it's like it's for us as one-dimensional beings. I feel like we just have certain limitations that are inherent to our kind of existence, and those aren't always comfortable to.
And maybe that's why we don't see aliens. Maybe
True.
Because they're experiencing one moment or all possible moments in one fine.
But why wouldn't they choose to experience my moment?
Maybe they already did.
Well, I wasn't there for it. Why didn't they invite me?
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. What would it be like actually interacting on a one-dimensional plane with beings who interact with us on a two-dimensional time plane? Can they come down to our level of sophistication? I mean, I think so.
I think so.
Yeah. But I just wonder what that would look like from our perspective, Well,
I feel like it's kind of like trying to imagine as a 2D creature, what it would look like to have a sphere interact with your plane of existence. And I guess similarly, but on a whole lot harder to comprehend level, a 3-dimensional, object interacting with a 4-dimensional object. Which, I mean, ultimately in a two-dimensional world, interacting with a sphere, it would just look like a line. In fact, it would look, no matter where you went on it, it will always look like the same length of line if it was a sphere.
Yeah, that's true. It kind of reminds me of when I was watching.
Because if you think about, hold on a second, if you think about a square, because of the different angles in the square, if you were to walk around it as a 2-dimensional creature, the lines would start being different lengths. The sides would start looking like there were different lengths until you got to the corner, in which case it would look like it was kind of just a dot if you were exactly staring at the corner. And then once you got over, kind of traveled more around it, you'd start seeing more, like you'd get from the dot point, and then you would see like a small line. It'd be like a very small line, and it'd start getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I guess we can't necessarily conceptualize that.
So it's like
where we are.
If we think about that, like in the concept of time, that hurts my brain. I'm not sure what that would even.
We're 3-dimensional creatures. Can we think of 2-dimensional time even?
Well, how would it look like if a line intersected with 1-dimensional? So all of your existence was okay. So if we imagine we're a 1-dimensional line, that means our whole existence is this black space. And then if we imagine a 2-dimensional object intersecting with that means at some point in that travel through this black space, we're just going to slam into this 2-dimensional, this 1-dimensional intersect of this 2-dimensional object. So we're going to slam into it like we would, if a two-dimensional time were to intersect, if 2-dimensional, I feel like our time would be replaced by their time.
That's what I'm thinking too. It's like, well, what would fundamentally be like? Would it corrode our brain? I don't necessarily think that it would have the ability to do that, especially since fundamentally physical beings. It just seems as something like the notion of time that we don't understand. There's not necessarily a notion that we would, in essence, be corroded or corrupted like as if we were to try to navigate a fourth dimension of space, for example, So that's an interesting concept. It's like, what if we did get to that 2-dimensional plane of time and then we hit it? What would that entail? There would still be an essence of our experience of the conditions for physical life were there. There's still 3-dimension of space on Earth and necessary conditions to live. It's just a different time frame of that existence.
That is hard to think about.
Yeah.
Huh.
And is it like a new experience? Or is it something that's a fundamental shift in your perspective in the past starts to integrate more so with your current orientation? Or can you remember that you were in one-dimensional time before? Or is it a fundamental shift as if you woke up, from a dream?
I had this idea for this kind of, I've never quite liked how in time travel movies, they always come up with like these paradoxes of time travel where you can't do this and you can't do that because
break the space-time
because you'll break the space-time continuum and yada yada. And then even in like multiverse theories, like they're like, you'll shatter their timeline into multiple timelines. And I came up with like this kind of way of visualizing why I don't think that would be the case. Which, if we imagine our timeline, so let's say from the very beginning, we all have, we'll imagine our timelines as individuals as strings attached to us, right? And the strings are made of gradients. So we'll imagine a orange to purple gradient, and as we're progressing through time, that gradient kind of like, stretches out and the most recent events being orange, the most late, in the past events being purple. And, now let's imagine one of us invents a time machine, right?
Okay.
And goes back in time. What would be happening is that we would, make sure I get this right. What would be happening is that their gradient would reverse, but it would still be going forward. So it would go from orange and start getting closer and closer and closer to purple. So the rest of the world's gradient we're at orange is our current space time, right? So we've got purple back here, a line to orange, which is our present. We would still keep going forward, but that gradient would go orange and start getting closer to purple as we traveled. For us, we traveled back in time. But for us, our gradient would continue.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
So our gradient would still be going from orange to purple. Or sorry, purple to orange. As we kind of traveled back in time, the world's gradient would reverse and go from orange to purple until we stopped traveling back in time, at which case it would go from purple. It would start going from purple to orange again as we existed within that. And then if we were to travel back in future, it would simply compress like their timeline or stretch, hours until we were. So basically you have like this, it's not a loop. We're not actually going back. We're actually re-recording the same events.
Yep.
So if you were to go back, so let's say I were to go back in time, I would kill my grandfather. Then I were to go back in time again, I would first have to pass the timeline in which I killed my grandfather. And then I could go back to when my grandfather was still alive. Because those both exist in the same time space.
Okay.
One's just after the other.
Mm-hmm.
So those both coexist. So I could essentially re-record things as many times as I wanted to, and those would still all exist on the same time continuum because they're just re-recordings. It's like you were to add an addition to a it's like you were to copy a film that you already recorded and then record over part of it, kind of almost.
Yeah. And, that brings up some fundamental ontological problems when it comes to the essence of what actually is reality itself. Is it all, like you said, is if we went back in time, would it just be this loop? Or, if you were to say, let's say we do in this reality with what we know, somehow we figured out how to, travel back to some event in time, whether that's, on the same space-time continuum, or if it's, kind of like you said, just like recording something over the time, and everything else still plays out the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Go ahead.
it's kind of what I think that this actually follows in line with what you're saying with the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. It's like when we measure the electron, before we do, it has a spin up and a spin down. And so when we measure it, well, why does it choose one? It's like, well, actually, it's split in a different world, in a different universe, a different dimension, whatever you want to call it. There actually was a spin up, even though you observed a spin down. And I think that if we were fundamentally to go back in time, it would be a different reality in and of itself. And there wouldn't, if you were to navigate that level of potentiality, you could see potential outcomes that did coexist with that new timeline you created, but would be different than the one you came from fundamentally, because it's a different universe in and of itself.
Yeah.
But I don't,
I think that I think that potentially, I don't think that those two things, the way that I'm describing it in the multiverse theory, I don't think those two things should be viewed as the same. However, I do think they could coexist. And here's why. Like, if we imagine our time as a one-dimensional line, by going back in time, we're not going back on the line. We're not reversing it and going back here. That's not happening. We're re-recording the same stuff over and over again as we continue down this line. So it's always, we're always continuing down the line, and we're just re-recording things. And so I think that can coexist with there being like an unlimited number of lines in 2D space or 3D space. There could be, I guess, 2D time or 3D time, but, so there could be many worlds theories meaning many, like an unlimited number of those one-dimensional lines that have the ability to do that.
Yeah.
And there could even be the potential that that timelines exist across them. But the key element there is that we imagine time as almost a stretch of film, an unlimited stretch of film that we record 3D space onto. And so if we were to go back in time, we would still be recording onto that film, but we would be recording 3D space backwards.
That's interesting. Now, let's say you traveled back in time, killed your grandpa. If someone else from a different timeline, not different timeline, but someone even farther in the future, went back to the time that you killed your grandpa, would your grandpa be dead?
I wouldn't know about it because they were further in the future than me.
Yeah.
So that new timeline, that new version of the past timeline would be recorded after them, not after me. So if I were to exist long enough to reach their timeline and reach the point when they did that, then and I wasn't a part of going back with them. I didn't go back with them. So I was experiencing the regular time continuum. Then I would get my time reversed back to that, I guess, before I even existed, if that was killing my grandpa. And then it would be a re-recorded version of that where my grandpa was dead. And as a result, I no longer existed. So from then on out, I wouldn't exist
there. But from your perspective, in the time that you were, would you still be there? Like, where's the navigational aspects when it comes to the dimensions of different time continuums?
from my perspective, once I reached the point where he went back and killed my dad, I wouldn't know the difference.
Mhm.
Like it's almost impossible to imagine how that would look like, because that timeline, in essence, at that point, I still lived that timeline, but at that point it blinks out of existence. So I never
Mhm.
finished my existence.
Okay, I'm following.
Yeah.
As much as I can, obviously.
So, it's let's say there might have been, okay, we'll use this as an example. Let's say initially in our timeline, I had 3 brothers.
Okay.
In the future, my brother makes an enemy of somebody who then travels back in time and kills him as a baby. Okay. Horrifying, but he does.
Very sad. Condolences.
That at that point, once we reach back to the time when he was supposed to be born, I now have my current life that I'm living, which is the one without him because he was killed. I don't know the difference.
I see. So it
So
integrates back into your current orientation.
yes. And so
Okay.
that also would mean though that I did live a life, a part of an existence with him as a brother.
Mhm. Why would you not experience that one?
I would have experienced that one, but I just wouldn't know it right now, because
Yes.
that's not a part of my current existence.
So there
Are 2 basically recordings of that time period that happen after each other, and those are, one of them is with that person and the other one's without it. And that doesn't violate any sort of, rules or anything.
Back to the purple or the orange.
And it fits within our, we wouldn't be able that's one of the reasons people like the multiverse theory, is because it kind of fits with our existence, allows for the movement along the timeline, and fits with our existence. There's, no paradoxes, so to speak.
Yeah.
So this kind of way of viewing it would make sense because of our limitations with being able to perceive time.
Yes. Dude, time is such a fascinating little artifact that exists. It's like, it's the reason why we can experience this, what we do. But it's still not understood in a way that would satiate the human mind and curiosity in of itself. And, I think we understand pretty good amount of it. I mean, there's some great physicists out there who really have a good grasp, but even then there's still,
we just don't have the ability to measure enough to be able to understand. Like there's elements that, as far as I know, are still under exploration. Like, how does the gravity time space interaction work, and what causes, fundamentally, what causes there to even be an interaction, and and there are elements such as the dark matter, dark energy, which are just observations that we've made about the universe that don't quite make sense to us. But those things indicate there's a pretty good piece of the puzzle that we're still missing. And I think it's likely because we don't have, at least currently, the ability to measure those things. Now, there's the possibility that we could use quantum physics as almost a bridge between dimensions that we can't perceive, if we can figure out a way to properly utilize quantum physics in our current dimension. And because what it would appear to, at least my understanding, what I know of quantum physics, what it would appear is that that things in the quantum realm can they exist in some other form of reality than we know. Meaning the most likely scenario there is that they are interacting with at least one other dimension.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It could be, more, but if that were the case, that could be a way of communicating and interacting with other dimensions, and then possibly as a result measuring, which could give us a better understanding of how our current dimension works.
Which, it's interesting in relation to like quantum computing. I was listening to physicist Brian Greene. I'm sure you've heard of him. Great guy.
He's a string theorist, though.
Yes, he's a string theorist. Are you not very loving of string theory?
No, I mean it's to
kind
me,
of makes sense
to me. They've been trying to force this thing for so long.
Mm-hmm.
They've been trying to make it work,
but it's
an elegant thought, and it is a good try. I say that I sound so haughty because I'm not a physicist. However, from what I understand from other experts, a lot of other experts' perspectives on the subject, it's not been working. Like they haven't been able to make it work because they're missing some of the fundamental pieces, which to me means stop pursuing that and go find a way of
why be so narrow-minded at
finding those fundamental pieces first, and maybe work on fields that are showing more congruence with reality and more measurable effects in order to achieve that end.
Yes.
If you want to still revisit string theory once you have more information later, and you want to revisit it when you have more ability to do the kind of experiments you need to do in order to confirm it, then or find the confirmation you're looking for, then that's fine. But there's no point in continuing to bang your head against a locked door.
Yeah.
And go find the key.
Yeah, go find the key. Yeah, you don't need to force your way through. And who knows, maybe, they will be able to force their way through at some point and be like, I did it. But, maybe there are a bunch of other rooms with keys that were more easily unlockable that actually had the key to that room.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you're able to have a more comprehensive understanding of even more stuff about reality.
Mm-hmm. Or like an alternate way of getting to the room that you're trying to get to. Like you could start, studying quantum mechanics and really kind of work on advancing that field, opening new doors through the room of quantum mechanics until you're able to find out how that connects with, your string theory ideas.
Mm-hmm. And the more we expand quantum mechanics, the more potential predictions could be made on what really is on that fundamental level of the mechanics of reality.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you're able to broaden that perspective, the more ability you have to make inferences into specifics of, the more intricate mechanics of an already intricate, system. I think that's really important instead of theorizing this really abstract concept that brings about no causally testable, predictions, at least exactly what I've seen, unless there are, I just haven't heard a string theorist. Like you said, it's very elegant, but I haven't heard a string theorist, and I've listened to quite a few, talk about what has been brought about. It's more as a result of it. It's just other things that bring about a result of potential string theory.
Right. Well, because of their inability to confirm it, there's not really a whole lot of real application.
What are you studying in a string theorist lab? I think it's just abstract mathematics.
It's like it's saying, it's like a lot of, if this is the case and this is the case, then this would explain like, and this would explain this. And the problem with that is it's a lot of like things that hinge on the actual theory being proven, and kind of like the core components and the difference between that, at least to my knowledge, and quantum mechanics, is that quantum mechanics is less in the it's less a theory and more of a field of exploration, where they're not theorizing about always, and they're not primarily theorizing about how to make this field work in concepts. They're actually testing and measuring things in order to make those determinations.
Yeah.
So, again, that's my limited knowledge of that. I'm not claiming, to be an expert, but I do enjoy looking into those things and listening and understanding them.
I mean, their way out is like, we can't build machines. We don't have the technology to prove it. That's the only reason why. And it's like, okay, that's, true, but maybe let's work on other things that'll bring about that technology, instead of just
like it's like trying to, it's like, it feels like kind of like trying to plan a vacation destination without a mode of transportation. You know what I'm saying?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
I could tell you blanked out for a second.
Sorry. There's multiple things going on in my head right now.
It's kind of like trying to plan a vacation destination without having a mode of transportation.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
It's like, what's the point in theorizing about what you could be doing, or what this experience might be that you have, if you don't currently have the means of getting there.
Yeah.
It's fun to think about, but it's not a worthwhile way to move the fields forward,
Yeah. It's like you're in the heart of Texas or in like the heart of just like North America, right? And you have a pretty good grasp of, kind of what's in the center of Canada and in the center of the United States. And you're trying to work out all these intricate things. And you're like, oh, well, I think that because of what we can see here, the coast or the water, the really good, fluid stuff is, it's kind of like, like the waves, through the streams and, that are really corresponding with, how the territory has formed because of what we can infer here in the heart of this land. We're going to be able to know what's over here. And it's like, well, not really, like you said. And we have no transportation to get out of this territory either. And so it's just, I think in some ways a lost cause, and you're taking some of the best minds out there and putting them in a really creative field, when in reality, it should really be infused with the more like calculative and innovative parts of what we currently understand. So we can, build these oil rigs, understand how to build a car or a plane and then fly over there, but we're not even there yet. We're still in tribes, that are trying to make maps of this, barely formed territory.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So, and they're insanely smart people, it seems like the best aspects of themselves are in the worst place possible.
Yeah. It's like
not the worst.
Consider what we knew of space before we were actually able to go visit space.
Yeah.
Or even really look at space, through any detail. Like us as just beings looking up at the sky. Like, what did we think of those things? There were observations that we could make that seemed to be pretty accurate, like as far as, the rotation and paths of, celestial objects and whatnot, and kind of conclusions that we could make from that were accurate. But beyond that, there wasn't much understanding we could gain of the universe and how it works. And it feels kind of similar to that in a way.
Mhm. No,
Just,
yeah.
just
Yeah.
a don't spend your time looking at the sky and thinking about what could be, build a spaceship and go there and check it out kind of thing. Anyway, we are at our 10-minute break point. And we will be back here and revisit you guys in 10 minutes or so.
10 minutes.
And we will have our research paper for you at that point. We're going to go over, we're going to kind of summarize and give you the down and the low for NSI-189.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Or Alto 100.
well, yeah, we pretend that name doesn't exist.
Doesn't really exist.
All right. So we will see you guys then.
See you
Stay
then.
tuned. Hey everyone, and we are back. Part two.
All right.
And we're gonna introduce this section with our kind of opening with our NSI-189 research overview.
Tell us about that.
Basically, it is a novel neurogenic compound that has been studied recently and is showing promise in treating several different types of depression and other conditions. But it's primarily being researched right now for depression. It's kind of unique in that it works differently from most of the other antidepressants out there in that it causes neurogenesis. And it kind of treats its depression through neurogenesis, and specifically neurogenesis in the hippocampal area. So in the hippocampus.
Yeah.
So it's overall is completely unique in its ability to treat depression in that way, because most others don't have anything to do with neurogenesis. They usually will try to treat symptoms and neurochemicals.
Yeah, that's something that I was actually going to mention is that, like traditional antidepressants, they modify neurotransmitters, that's kind of what they do. And that's how they kind of treat that depression. But about this, like you said, it's about neurogenesis, which I think is so fascinating, but also pretty much. So I'm going to go over like the findings.
Yeah. What were the key findings on that?
So in the phase 1B study, this study in patients with major depressive disorder showed that NSI-189 was safe and well tolerated. It also suggested potential antidepressant and pro-cognitive effects, which is cool. Makes sense. It's neurogenesis, so it's going to have that pro-cognitive effect. And then the phase 2 study further confirmed the safety and tolerability of NSI-189 in major depressive disorder patients. Now, it also showed major improvements in depression symptoms compared to placebo.
It has anti-inflammatory properties, which is kind of one of those added benefits, but is often kind of overlooked because a lot of people don't know that our brains are actually quite often struggle with inflammation. And there are multiple environmental virus or viral and just biological resource dependent issues that arise that can cause brain and neural inflammation. And it's something that people struggle with all the time without even knowing about it. Even nerve, pain and injury can cause brain inflammation.
Yeah.
And so compounds having anti-inflammatory properties is almost a kind of a signature. It's almost like FDA, not the FDA approved, but like, USDA organic, like, stamp on something. It's kind of like, it's like, okay, like this, we're not just talking about a drug that's going to modify or change the way things are working, or like we're talking about something that could very well be healthy for me.
Yes, it's almost, it has this holistic aspect to it that I actually really think is beneficial in ways that we don't even realize, because oftentimes, with these traditional depressants, it oftentimes has some pretty unwelcome side effects, if you will. Even if some of them aren't necessarily as severe, you're still going to have to kind of struggle a little bit afterwards. But it seems like with NSI-189, there is that element to it that allows you to just enhance the further ability to have a healthy lifestyle and for you to, have a good experience in life. And, in those aspects, the mechanisms of action make sense, because the potential applications for it, right? When you think about those mechanisms of actions, obviously MDD, major depressive disorder, but also post-traumatic stress disorder, Alzheimer's disease, traumatic brain injury, strokes, and age-related cognitive decline. I mean, if you think about it, I think that when it comes to traumatic brain injury, right, synaptogenesis and neurogenesis, that's obviously going to help. And then the anti-inflammatory effects, I think that's really what's going to get it for Alzheimer's disease, right?
Yeah, I think that that there seems to be, and that's one of the things I was going to mention earlier was one of the element commonalities I've noticed in treating both, I guess, and trying to treat and resolve major depressive disorder as well as Alzheimer's. Like they both have a significant amount of overlap. They both require neurogenesis and the preservation and protection of existing neurons, which is interesting to me. Like that those two, while one is like wildly debilitating and that it's like actually removes your ability to function and move. The other one is also debilitating, but in more of a lack of the will, I guess, to make that stuff happen. So I wonder if there is like
some sort of correlation.
If there is a correlation between those two, and whether the mechanisms are almost the same of those two.
It almost seems like the mechanisms that drive both those factors are like the polar opposite of potential dopamine problems. You know what I mean?
Well, Parkinson and Alzheimer's have a lot of overlap, and Parkinson's I know is caused by the degradation of dopamine neurons. So
yeah, you're right.
Dopamine, I'd say, is actually, if anything, it'd probably be the opposite of that. It'd be that like they both have a lot to do with it.
Okay. Yeah. No, yeah. The more I thought about it, I think what I'm thinking about is the way to get there is a little bit.
Well, you're thinking probably that because of the fact that a lot of treatments for depression work kind of on the serotonin level and address that as the neurotransmitter of choice.
Yeah.
But yeah, so depression is often associated with, I think, serotonin or maybe lack of serotonin. I really don't think I think what they're doing when they treat that, and this is the reason why I'm not a fan of antidepressants, typical antidepressants in general, is that part of the problem with depression is that you have the lack of, a lack of will almost to do things. Treating serotonin is not the resolution of that. What you might make them feel better through that temporarily, but it's like giving the reward without the action.
Yep.
Serotonin is something that comes as a result of dopamine causing you to achieve something. And so you're not prompting them to action and thus getting a reward from that action. You are rewarding them for doing nothing or for like almost being depressed. you're putting them into a sedentary like state, and they're already there and haven't done anything to like.
And it's really those action, that movement towards something that is going to start to change.
It's the yin
brain.
and the yang,
Yeah.
It's like I sweep the floor, I get the whole place looking clean. It looks nice. Like it took a while, but now, it's done, and I can just relish in this, and,
In this
dopamine, serotonin, like combo.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't, depression, the fact that they're not moving and doing things. Yes, there's probably a lack of serotonin, but it's not a lack. And that's the feeling that they get. It's probably the lack of serotonin, but that's not what you treat. You don't treat that. You treat the lack of motivation.
Yeah.
And you get them doing things. And then once they're doing things, they will get the serotonin naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And also promote a healthier, more productive lifestyle process.
That is interesting, because in placebo studies that, people got antidepressants, and there were the people who got antidepressants that were real, and ones that were placebo. Oftentimes there was actually a bit of overlap on some positive influences on both of them, because what happened is that from taking the placebo, they thought, well, I should associate this with a more productive lifestyle. It's like, okay, now it's like, okay, I have what I need to start doing things. And all of a sudden they start brushing their teeth every morning. They make their bed. They do those things that give that kind of serotonin dopamine combo, and end up having a more productive, healthier, better lifestyle. And that's what I actually really like about NSI-189, is that it actually, instead of just promoting the relief, it promotes the action that then brings about a more natural relief, which I think that is something that is huge. If I can enhance my experience working towards a certain goal, I'd very much rather that than just feel relieved at the stagnation that my experience is in now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think everyone should feel that way personally.
Yeah. Keep going. I'm going to look for a second. I'm going to look at, try and find my research on blanking on the name. It's the 9-MEBC. The one that stimulates the growth and preservation of new dopamine neurons. Because I'm interested, I wonder how that would combine with something like this.
Yeah, you're right.
Because you're creating new dopamine neurons, so you're creating more motivation, and you're also addressing you also prompting synaptogenesis. So you're prompting the creation not only of new neurons to connect to those dopamine neurons, but you are promoting the creation of new synapses, between them. Yeah. And I wonder if those two would have a synergistic effect.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on obviously the person who is, trying to have an experience that takes advantage of the most relevant tasks and abilities to then produce that synergy. Maybe it wouldn't happen naturally. Well, obviously it would happen naturally within the brain as you do those things. But like you said, there has to be that action aspect. But then when you add that element would create that synergy to even further enhance that experience. I definitely, it's interesting. I don't think fundamentally that we're wired to want that stagnant relief. I don't think so. Like, I think it actually bothers us.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think it almost is an aggravator to not have the yin to the yang.
Yeah.
We doesn't feel. It's fascinating too. Like, what is it about that we don't like? But I think it's that we have a desire. It goes back to our base desire to survive, and the fact that we know that having one without the other is not a healthy way to do that. And having, like, for instance,
just having the serotonin, that's not prompting you to take steps to help you better survive, you know?
Oh yeah, 100%. And, it kind of follows along with kind of like my kind of theory that I'm developing, which is like, the MI is maximally elongated informative experiential success. If I were to go by
You need
that
to work on that name.
I call it MIS, but it's like nobody knows what that is. It's like I have to go on the long name, but it encompasses it quite well because it's that baseline need to orient yourself towards maximizing your experience in the most successful way possible. And I think fundamentally that stagnation is going against that fundamental orientation that we represent, and it's somewhat synonymous with survival.
Interesting. So, I'm going back to my research on 9-MABC. And one thing I forgot about this was that not only does it interact with the dopamine receptors by binding to them, and increasing your dopamine levels, but it also does increase serotonin levels as well. So it increases both of those together. And because it's an monoamine oxidase inhibitor. And so it technically, most of those like act on the serotonin level. This one happens to also interact with dopamine, which is kind of the thing that makes it unique, and it increases dopamine receptors. And so that combination of the two is probably why this hasn't gone through a whole lot of human. Actually, it hasn't gone through any human testing. It's gone only through animal testing. So there were effects observed on animals, but since those don't always translate to humans, I'll bring up the anecdotal reports from users who have tried it. There is a couple common threads through those. One is an increase in motivation. Two is an increase in mood. And it's rare for something to be able to accomplish both of those at the same time. Have a serotoninergenic. I don't know if I said that right, but the effect where it makes you feel happy or feel better, but also increase your motivation.
Yes.
And so the fact that it does those two things is one of the things that makes it really unique. And one of the reasons why I think it could potentially, obviously you wouldn't want to try that without human testing, but like
I do.
But aside from that, hypothesizing, I think that those two potentially could have a really powerful combination.
For sure.
Now I'd have to delve more into to know if they're the exact kind of the class of small molecule that they fall under, in order to know if there tends to be any like interaction between those two classes, or not.
And like why it synergizes.
Oh my God. I'm realizing too now that, dude, how did I not remember this?
Oh,
It also interacts with the adenosine receptors and with the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors.
Okay.
All four of them. That's crazy.
Wow.
Man. So,
that's even more fascinating.
Yeah. And it's not verified that it does interact with the adenosine. Some studies suggest that it does. So it's not for sure known yet, but particularly the studies suggest that it interacts with the A2A subtype. And those receptors are the ones that play a role in regulating dopamine, and tend to be things that are actually targeted for Parkinson's therapy and things like that. And then with the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, the same thing, where it's not completely verified yet, but some of the studies suggest that they actually modulate the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, which are often things that are implicated in the neurodegenerative diseases and whatnot. Actually, that's really fascinating.
I don't even know what to do with that.
That's almost something I need to like process for a while.
Yeah, this might be something that we have to do in the next podcast.
I feel like we should go over that one. Yeah.
That's crazy. I don't know.
And there's even more on it, but I kind of want to save it for another conversation.
Yeah.
It seems like a really, I'm sad that I think they're developing a better version of it right now, which is probably why they dropped,
human trials.
They didn't do, or they stopped their trials on 9-MeBC. But, I'm kind of sad that they didn't continue researching this one, considering how promising it looked on a lot of different levels.
Yeah.
Like maybe it couldn't cure Parkinson's disease. Maybe it wasn't, enough. It wasn't strong enough to cure Parkinson's or, something like that. But it still seems worth researching its potential application.
Maybe we need to do that. Maybe we just research it.
Yeah.
I guess. Maybe that's what we need to do.
That's one of the reasons of why I want to start a research lab and want to be able to I want to be able to like fund studies and be able to run studies on stuff like this in order to give it further credence, because a lot of the stuff that doesn't go towards treating specific diseases that can likely be marketed and sold for pretty significant profit. A lot of those things go unresearched because of the expense involved in that process.
And here's the thing: when it comes to like a lot of the more mainstream supplements that are used for brain functionality, a lot of them are good, but there's just such a rich field of potential other ways to get an even more and I would say enhanced cognitive functionality. And these are some of them that no one's ever really heard of, that we're like, I can't completely cure Parkinson, so we're just going to put it on the back burner, when it's like this could revolutionize somebody's life, a normal person's life, like in ways that we don't know.
Yeah. Like what about his ability to treat depression and what is it? I'm blanking on the name, adodynia or something like that. Adodynia. So it's basically like kind of like the depression that comes with a decrease in dopamine functionality.
Dude, yes. I remember literally I see the
I know
that
I see the letter, like the shape of the word and everything, and I can't remember exactly what it is.
Yeah, I know.
It's one of those words that I've read a lot and like, but I rarely like would say out loud, and so it didn't really register the actual spelling. But yeah, no, like treating things like that might not be as life threatening as Parkinson's, but like you're saying, they could significantly improve and alter somebody's life. And maybe potentially prevent some of these things from happening. If you think about somebody that has a propensity for a genetic propensity for developing Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, and we have them on these things early on.
Yep.
Yeah, it might not be able to treat or reverse it, might not be that strong, but it could stop or slow, the progression, and could prevent things from even getting to a point where they become debilitating.
Yeah, that was one thing that really impressed me about J147, was that it actually kept in contact the genetic transcriptomes within the cells within the hippocampus. So instead of it degrading over time, it kept its original state of functionality for enhanced longevity. And that's one of the things where it's like, oh, well, maybe if you have like the genetic propensity to have these kind of proclivities towards degradations and like Parkinson's disease, different things of that sorts, if you never get to that threshold that allows for that fullness to take over, that fullness of the disease to take over, you might actually be okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd agree with that.
There's a lot of, I feel like in this is probably common amongst a lot of really developed and complex fields. But especially I've noticed in the medical field, there tends to be a element of don't question the way that things are done. And this is the way that we do
Shut
them.
up and calculate.
Right. This is the way that we do them. There's not a better way. Stop looking for a better way of doing things.
Yeah.
And people just have a vested interest in the current version of the system, which makes sense and is fine. But but it's only by, I feel like, while there is credence to oftentimes things are done the way they are done for a reason, there's also credence to, if you don't question the system, how can it ever grow?
Mm-hmm.
And I say that to mention that I see a lot of that in the medical field, a lot of areas of potential improvement and different ways of looking at things, or doing things that go unexplored because it's not financially beneficial at the moment to do so. And, just like an example of like outside the box thinking, I watched a video, from this woman talking about her studies on treating brain cancer. And she was able to go about treating it by going at it from a completely different angle than traditional cancer therapies. She was able to find a solution for treating this type of brain cancer by looking at the molecular structure and the components in the DNA that were prompting the growth, and finding a way to develop a molecule that could fit within that structure and block that from happening. And so she basically went through a ton of different iterations of molecule shapes with a machine learning model that eventually found, I think, 3 potential candidates for it, and then one of which they tested and tried and worked. Wow. And so that's the kind of outside the box thinking and kind of growth that can happen. Like, think about, that's cancer. Like, that is something that has been baffling people on how to treat for, ever since we've known about it and what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had some success, but it's been kind of like a coin toss almost.
Pretty much. And
so one person, thinking outside the box as far as treatment goes, and rethinking kind of the mechanisms of that treatment, resulted in a treatment for a pretty deadly the cancer being able to be very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's people like their boxes too much.
I would agree. I think it's really comfortable and cozy. And so people are just scared to get out into this unknown kind of weather that is outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
They almost view outside the box as like this abyss that has these dark entities that they don't know how to fight. And it's like, in reality, it's almost as if those entities end up becoming, I was going to say you, in a way. And you'll realize that, you kind of see the ideas that form outside of the box as almost a community that you build up of ideas that are then able to build a house, an ecosystem, a whole society built. I feel like,
it's like being it's almost like being in a boat on the middle of the ocean. You're comfortable in that boat. That boat is safe. It's the world that you know and you're comfortable with. There's no danger there. It's a not something that's hard to do. But jumping into the water and putting on your scuba gear, jumping in the water, exploring the ocean, you realize the inner, like the majesty that was underneath you the entire time, and the whole worlds that were underneath you without you even knowing.
Yeah.
That you wouldn't have ever known had you just stayed on the boat.
And I love the quote. That's like, a boat is safest in the harbor. That's not what it was built for.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same way we are. I think we're created for that created innovative aspects of, what humans can do. And I think that's fundamental to something that characterizes our physiology and what our genes have expressed in our orientation and want us to do. It's like, well, okay, let's do it then.
Yeah.
I think that's important personally. And I think that no matter the results, it will be better than if you didn't do it.
Right.
100%.
Yeah. It's the same feeling I have about curiosity. Like, without curiosity, what's the point? Like, life feels very dull and pointless when you don't allow yourself to be curious and to question and to love the unknown.
I think that's why I tried to coin the term empathetic intellectualist, because if you don't empathize with ideas and truly try to understand them, that innate curiosity is never going to spark, and you are never going to have that intrinsic, exciting experience that is associated with it, So I think that's fundamentally what's going to characterize that dopaminergic surge that starts to happen. It's when that curiosity gets invoked, and that can happen in many different ways, And I think that ideas, especially, are the best way to achieve something like that in a productive manner, and something that is going to, at least with how humans are, the human trajectory, with how it's going, I think ideas are going to be the best way to achieve that kind of that lifestyle of pursuing something that prioritizes a fundamental goal to our physiology,
Yeah. I had somebody assert the other day, well, probably a couple of weeks back, that I made a statement about having a passion and a desire for knowledge, and then made a statement about being comfortable and loving the unknown. And they asserted that I was contradicting myself with that. And I was like, no, I'm not contradicting myself. Like, I love the unknown, and I'm comfortable with the unknown being unknown because I love the process that and the path that my curiosity and my desire to know takes me on. It's about like that path and the journey to find the answers. So if there were no unknowns and no answers to be found, then I wouldn't have that path. I wouldn't have that journey, that exploration, and so I can love both of those things. I can love trying to understand and know things, as well as the unknown, because those two are what causes that journey and experience for me.
Yeah.
And I hope this doesn't sound different than how I mean it, but when I see people living their lives fear of the unknown and clinging to what is comfortable and what they think they know, it irks me and it makes me sad to see, because that's like, for me, is like the joy of life.
Yeah.
It's like this, the spice, that makes things interesting, is that kind of relationship and handshake with the unknown, where you try and figure out what it is.
And it's not like it's going to be comfortable at the beginning. It wasn't for any of us,
No.
And I think, it's, I remember Dr. Huberman, that guy on his podcast with David Goggins, right? He was talking about the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, right? Which is the part of the brain that grows when you do something you don't want to do. And all of a sudden, as you continue doing that, you do actually get comfortable. So is our neurology, illogical? I don't think so. I think there's something fundamental to what you were saying. It's not a contradiction.
Yeah.
That's for sure. It's something fundamental to even our brain chemistry. It's like, it's something that uncomfortability is such, it's a very loose term, right? Because there are a lot of things that could make you potentially uncomfortable, but also, there's that psychological aspect of like, kind of like your will to supersede that,
Will to survive.
Like, here's an example.
It's the eye of the tiger. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Rising up
To the challenge of rivals.
No, but anyways, I do a lot of MMA training. So, usually 3 times a week I'll do it. And, what's interesting is, one of the days we had to do knuckle push-ups, and these weren't like normal knuckle push-ups on the floor. No, we had to go to like the hard tile floor and use just our top 2 knuckles. Right. And so you can kind of see what happened there. It's been pretty rough, but what was interesting is that because of my will to push through, I didn't have a bad experience. The pain was terrible. It hurt like nothing else. But what's interesting is that because I had the will to push through and want to see the results of my fruition and the uncomfortableness that lied within that, I got to actually experience the endorphin release afterwards. And all of a sudden, I felt like in a much clearer headspace. I felt like my cognitive state was very well afterwards, and I felt good. And what's interesting is if I didn't have that will aspect of myself to push through that uncomfortableness, I would have never experienced that. And actually, I would have come away after doing 3 of them and been like, oh, that sucks. And I would have just had a terrible experience. It's like that uncomfortability is what's going to lead to that satisfactory state that is necessary, I think, for continuing, in these goal strivings, so I think that's something that everyone needs to start doing personally. That's my advice.
Yeah. I remember there was like, for a long time, I was clinging to a lot of the religious beliefs that I grew up with and that I was taught. A lot of the kind of stuff that I guess, propaganda almost, that it's just stuff that you hear and you repeat and you don't question. And it's
everyone gets
unkosher to question. Exactly. Kind of like political views. But for a long time, I just kind of clung to those and didn't question like a good old boy. But and then it was around the time that I started developing a lot of my logical and mathematical processing abilities in order to process emotions, better and that kind of stuff. While I was working on learning programming and whatnot. But one of the other things that happened around that time as a result was I started seeing, whether I wanted to or not, the illogical elements of those beliefs and those thoughts. And then started, as a result, having that questioning pop up, the seeing something doesn't make sense. And as a result, you now no longer trust that it is what you thought it was, and for a long time, I tried to ignore that, just was
Can't
like,
for long though.
and then eventually got to the point where too many things weren't making sense for me to ignore it any longer. Started actually looking at from a somewhat objective, perspective without fear of ramification of it, because at that point I was just like, I got to deal with this. And saw it for kind of what it was very quickly. Like once I was able to obtain that objective perspective, I was able to see it in its entirety for in a very short period of time and come to terms with it. And I realized after that process, I had been making myself so uncomfortable by clinging to that stuff, by clinging to that known and what I thought was comfortable and safe, rather than confronting it and processing it and actually trying to see it for what it was.
Tiny bit of uncomfortability that went over, the necessary threshold for that realization, that objective perspective, was probably a lot more freeing than staying in that enclosed state.
It was a little uncomfortable at the beginning because of that like, oh, I'm a terrible person because I'm questioning this kind of stuff, and you have those really uncomfortable elements as a result. But those, kind of ironically are what eventually kind of helped prompt me to actually confront it.
Yeah.
And then as a result, like I no longer have any of those, have to deal with any of those, that weird, closed-minded attitudes and like chosen ignorance,
Yeah.
And now it's funny, whenever I have to talk with people that are still in that state, I understand it because I was there, but that doesn't mean it doesn't piss me off any less. It still pisses me off. It's like, if I could just get you to reach the point that I reached so that you can start seeing this stuff from that perspective, it's going to make you feel so much better. And you're going to be able to, the world is going to be so much clearer to you. Like,
it's fascinating. I'm not at the point to where it pisses me off, but I'm at the point to where I feel really sad. It's kind of like an empathy, if you will, towards their intellectual ideas, if you want to call them intellectual, but
lack thereof.
It's, I'm of the idea that religion actually keeps people from having religious experiences. I will admit there is obviously something more that characterizes fundamental orientation within the universe and with the subjective agents that I think we haven't discovered yet, that we can't see yet. That doesn't mean
you're talking about there's something more to the universe beyond what we can experience and see.
Yes, but
yes,
is
I would agree.
That a man-made religion? Probably not.
I tend to avoid using the word religion or religious at all.
Yeah.
Even if there's something I'm going to subscribe to and believe in, it's going to be something that I have sufficient evidence or lack of evidence to believe. And by that, I mean, like the fact that there is a lack of evidence to explain certain things, that we observe in our universe suggests to me that the something more hypothesis is a valid hypothesis, and so I don't believe in things because I feel it. I don't believe in things because it makes me comfortable or makes me feel good to do it. I believe in things because maybe it started with a feeling that turned into a observation, which turned into research, which turned into, something I understand consciously, but it's never just based off of feeling. It's based off of data that has been processed.
It's not an axiomatic belief that you don't fundamentally understand because of further inference. And I think if you stay there, I think that's bad. I think that's really terrible.
It's like, why would you not process that any further? Like, why would you stick with that feeling about something being the way that it is and then not seek to prove it?
Yeah.
And that's what religion is it's a comfortability with believing something without a seek to prove it.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's like, I do really like listening to atheist versus religious debates. I love them because, I do like seeing where both sides are coming from, and I can see the want on both sides for the most part for some sort of truth. There are people, there are apologists, and there are, other, atheistic philosophers who are really genuine and have who have good conversations. It's just the axioms of their beliefs are different. So, it's like, if you want to believe there's a God, I'm there in the sense that I have to word this very carefully because I wouldn't necessarily say I'm agnostic.
All I was about to say is like, I'm not atheist or Christian, but I would describe myself as agnostic because I am not disputing the possibility of there being a God or a higher being or a creator, of what we know. I just don't think he cares. And I don't particularly care as a result.
It's actually in another podcast. That's actually something we can talk about,
Yeah.
And it's actually, we were a subset system of his creation. Wasn't even an intentional design.
Perhaps, yeah.
Which
like,
is
what's to say that it was even intentional.
And that there's actually a lot of ancient philosophy surrounding different ideas of that, and like different potential, philosophical ideas of like the evil God, or different things of that nature, which I think are actually really fun to look into, and I'm of the belief that if
everybody always portrays, this one thing that lets is probably a figment of human psyche. Everyone always, no matter what religion, where it stems from, they always portray at least their primary God as, I'll qualify this, almost always. I'm not going to say always because I haven't looked at all religions, but almost always portray God as a loving, caring, like creator that actually gives a crap and pays attention. And to me, that makes sense that people would do that because it verifies for them that they have meaning, and that they have purpose, and that it gives them a comfortability with and a reason for their own existence, and that they can understand. And I'm not saying there isn't a reason for our existence. I wouldn't assert that because I don't know. But
it makes sense.
I am saying that is what we want. We want to beyond just having a purpose for our life. We want to also believe that we will survive. That's our survival instinct talking. And that's why we create heavens. Every religion, they've got a heaven. And so I feel like humanity develops we have these needs, we start developing these, trying to make sense of the world, and as a result, developing these hypotheses that then become religions that comfort us in certain ways, and which then society takes and turns into a tool and to use to help manage society better.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have the result, the rise of Christianity and whatnot, and heaven and hell. And like, if you're good, you'll go to heaven. If you're bad, you'll go to hell. Like, you don't want to succumb to the devil. Don't do these bad things. These are things that help society at certain points in its
Mm-hmm.
development. And were tools that they utilized, but have gone past, gone past the point of them being useful tools, and have now branched
Mm-hmm.
into them being irrelevant and causing problems because you're trying to use a tool that's outdated for the task.
Mm-hmm. And it's you're right. I think what's interesting is that if I'm going to take Christianity seriously, I must look at the fact that through the biblical narrative, it seems as though that God actually evolves us. That seems to be the precursor that exists throughout the corpus. And I think that if we're going to continue through that evolutionary process of that biblical narrative, I think we need to turn a little bit away from the heaven and hell, sky daddy, whole kind of idea, which I think is actually holding a lot of people back. Like I said, from those true religious experiences. And you're right. I try to be very careful with how I word this, because a lot of times certain words that are used in a more general sense have a lot of preemptive motivations behind them that I don't necessarily represent. So I'm trying to find the best way to.
You're saying they're likely to provoke an emotional response that you're not,
because it's
you're not trying to provoke.
I hear you. I really do. But we're holding on to some of these ideas that are just fundamentally illogical. And if you want to continue with how the time is evolving, that's why I think from Judaism to Christianity was able to be so popular and so self-sustaining for so long, is because you could see that structural flexibility within it. And I think that actually, because it stopped structuring itself like that way, it's going to crumble under its own weight. And I think actually, it seems to me that the Bible actually says that that's going to be the case. So it's funny, but we'll see how it all plays out. It's just, I don't think as we further develop, they're either going to have to change, or it's going to lose itself, and it's different than something like, let's say, like radical Islam. Obviously the majority of them are not, but you can instill fear and subjugation as a way to continue on that as well, which also works fairly well. And so but to have something as altruistic and loving and sacrificial as Christianity, there's going to have to be that flexibility, but I don't see that anymore.
Well, I wouldn't describe Christianity as a whole as loving at all. They
the ethos
tend to be pretty, their ethos is, but in practice they tend to be pretty judgmental.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because they're denying the physiological aspects of themselves that actually exist, and turn away from it and unconsciously just manifest them. And they are trying to, it's so weird. It's like, it's, one of the things about judging that I always thought was interesting. It's like, okay, so we have this innate physiological desire to judge. It's an innate kind of just function that we do. Like, obviously when you meet someone, immediate, very complex systems are judging this person in front of you,
mm-hmm.
And so it's like, well, what is that judgment oriented towards? It's like, why don't you just say, okay, I do have this. How do I change it to serve the functionality that I want it? It's like, well, instead of just judging people generally, maybe you judge how to love them. And then that actually, from a psychological standpoint, will excite a true, genuine connection with them. And it'll allow your more people interactive abilities to actually manifest and naturally, so it's like There are all of these things that people are trying to deny
Mm-hmm.
instead of create through change from innate physiological functions, which is why I think, it's some things in this modern world are going to crumble under its own weight.
Yeah. And the I think what people really don't like, one of the things people really don't like about the Christianity when they're outside of it, when they're kind of interacting with Christians, is the beyond just the element of ignorance and blindness to questioning things, is, and I don't say that to say that all Christians are always ignorant. I'm saying that they have a tendency to be blind to anything that goes against, their values, and I think that one of the reasons why people don't like being around them, other than those, is that they see the inherent selfishness in the things that the Christians are doing, in the way that Christians interact with people, and can observe that kind of indirect selfishness that causes a Christian to, because they feel like in order to be a good Christian that is endeared to God and that is close to God, and they should be close to God, they feel like in order to achieve that, they need to do these certain things and be these certain ways. And one of those things is witnessing and being a good influence on other people, and
even just becomes condescending.
Exactly.
Without any actual mature wisdom to give.
Exactly. So they don't have anything really to back it up. It's just that this is what you should be doing. My way is better than your way. This is what I think is real. And I'm not going to talk to you about why and have that conversation. You just need to believe it. And they're doing all that, believing themselves to be unselfish and altruistic and kind and loving, because they're helping this person get saved and yada, 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 while ignoring the fact that the root reason for them doing that is that they're trying to endear themselves to God, this God that they believe is such high value, and is important for them to be close to him and do what he says so that they can go to heaven and all this stuff. And that is the motivator behind them doing that. So it's not unselfish. It's not altruistic. It is still is based in selfishness, which is fine. It's not that that's not fine. It is, because we all do things based in selfishness, but they're ignoring that. And they are trying to impose their views and their lack of reasoning on other people without confronting that kind of transactional selfish, or that transactional nature that comes with selfishness. We're all selfish. If I do things to help other people, if I do something to help somebody fix their car, I pay for something for them or whatever, I don't care how many levels removed that is, it's still an act of selfishness, because in some way or another, either I'm expecting to get something back, or I feel better about myself because of that, and I feel like I'm more worthwhile as a human being because I did that.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all things that are selfish motivators, and it's just the nature of like the way that we are. We're not going to can't expect anything different.
Yeah.
But it's about maintaining that transaction of I do something, essentially, I do something for you. And ideally, you do something for me,
Yeah. I'm not going to
ask you to just do something for me. And I'm fine with giving like freebie, so to speak, like giving something out.
Like the responses.
Yeah. And I think that recognizing that kind of element to our nature, is important because it helps you maintain an accurate, realistic perspective on your relationships and why they might be struggling or why they're working. And, if somebody's constantly giving out and they're not getting in return, that transactional relationship is very lopsided and it's showing a skew in values, there. And there's no problem with it being, self-based. Like, for example, my friendship with you, like ultimately it's selfish for me because I like having somebody to talk to, and I like being able somebody that understands my ideas and can like hear me and talk back,
even like take it and then do as much as I can with it to even further,
and then give it back. Exactly, and like is a completely selfish motivator for me. But I imagine that it's the same for you, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's that recognition of what stems from your sense of self. And I do like to differentiate between the negative connotations of selfishness, because not all, like you said, not all selfishness is bad. It's like, what is this overarching badness that we have to be considerate of, And so usually to, stay away from that, I say, so it's like the negativeness is selfishness. The positive altruistic aspects, both of us, are interacting in that way, stems from a sense of self that is innate to who we are. And I think that's something that people are missing. And because it's on this overarching term of selfishness, they kind of forget that. And, I will say I'm very careful when it comes to religious people, because oftentimes, I would say the majority of the common folk think that way. Right. And I will say you do get to a level of people who have really thought everything out in every way, shape, or form, and have somehow gotten to this point of religiosity that they've accepted. And, interacting with those types of people is very interesting because it's like, okay, you seem to have this axiomatic motivator of this God figure. And then from there, you are able to still explore kind of the more innate aspects of life in a way that is genuine to who you are, which I respect. It's like, instead of being agnostic, you just accept it as fundamental and then explore everything else. And just, which is interesting, because I am of the notion, right? It's the reason why most people are agnostic. It's because there aren't very many good arguments against God, but there are an infinite amount of good arguments against religion, And so if you want to harmonize with a religious idea, that's great. But for the most part, from what I see from people who are, like the neuroscientists and the people that I listen to who do believe in God, they would be called heretics by any religion ever, like they just don't fit, but I respect and I can see why they do have that kind of essence of this more metaphysical figure that orients everything behind what they do. But they do that in consideration of everything else that also exists.
Yeah.
Which, it's like,
it's valid. Yeah. That's one of the reasons why I'm agnostic and not, not atheist, but because I wouldn't remove that as a possibility because I don't know, but religion,
us mortal beings will have no idea, man.
Religion to me makes like
Judgment Day.
Religion to me as a concept makes sense within the context of what I know human tendencies are and what the things that they're worried about and the things that they want out of life. It makes sense why develop on its own. And it doesn't make sense to me the way that they're typically like described and portrayed. And like there are massive contradictions in a lot of them. And while a lot of the morals and whatnot that they contain are good principles for society, to work within, the beyond just the lack of evidence to suggest that any of the stuff that they recount, as far as God, their interactions with God, actually happened. They often describe a God that doesn't live by his own rules.
Yeah.
And so there's I would agree with that. And these are all, opinions. We're not offended by people that believe differently, even though it may seem like, we're being critical.
We're critical of it,
but yeah, we tend to be critical of pretty much everything. And I think that no matter what people believe and what they think, they should be given the opportunity to have a discourse with people about it. And that's, I think, one of my biggest problems is the lack of ability of people to discourse about this kind of stuff without getting offended.
Yeah, that was my thing. It's just like, if you believe this, shouldn't you think it's true? So you have a problem with actually having it challenged?
Right.
Like, if you have a difficulty and it harms you to have this challenge, then I don't really think you fundamentally believe it anyways. And I think that's why they act the way they do. And when people can see that.
If it's like so unprotectable that you're unable to have conversations with people that believe differently and actually try and consider things from, their perspective, you're right. That is an indicator that perhaps the ground you're standing on is not too solid.
Yeah. And I think that's why they usually crumble under their own weight and don't actually live up to the values that are instilled within the ethos that they buy, for the majority of what they do. And then they say, well, I'm imperfect.
Well, it's unrealistic to expect anybody would anyway. It's a lot of those expectations are just go against human nature.
No, yeah, for sure. And I think that's why, you can see that evolution throughout the biblical corpus, which I think is fast. Like, I will say, it's a good book. It's a good book, and it's very interesting. And, there's some pretty good archaeological evidence to show that it follows a very well-framed timeline.
Sure.
Obviously not Genesis, I think that's a story.
Yeah.
But who knows? Actually, I'm a young Earth creationist. I think the Earth exists. Was created 6,000 years ago.
No, I still know people that are young Earth creationists.
Well, God just created everything how it is.
And on the seventh day,
we all took a nap. That was great.
He said it was good.
It was really good. Yeah, I mean,
it was a tasty dish.
Very yummy. But
anyway, all righty. Well, I think that's going to conclude it for today.
For this podcast.
Yeah. Yes. We actually, we were trying something new kind of this time where we decided to just let ourselves converse and, see where the conversational flow took us.
Yep.
Rather than kind of having objectives going into it. And
a few tiny objectives, but even
you just put a paper and whatnot
and just went wherever we wanted with it.
Yeah. And personally, I loved the flow this time. It was a lot of fun.
That wave, like it should be.
I don't know if we actually covered many topics or if we covered a whole bunch of topics. I'm really not sure.
They were fairly all interconnected with each other.
Yeah, they were.
The majority of it all, like you said, it flowed.
Yeah. So, we'll probably continue with that format and see how we like it. If watches and has a thought on it, feel free to let us know. We'd love to hear it. Anyway, we will catch you guys next week. We may have coming up here. We may have some new cameras. So, get ready for some upgraded visuals here. We will see you guys then.
See ya.